judicial review to start. So far, the province has accepted Kirk and I as having standing. So far, so good. They've accepted that we have nothing in terms of personal gain or loss. We're not abutting the property. We're not upset in terms of any direct pain to us. And they've accepted that we are public interest litigants. So we're acting in the public interest. So far, so good. However, rather than to proceed with responding to the application, you may be aware that they've decided to file a motion to dismiss the application. So in other words, not having the court even hear the application. And that process is a legal process within the larger legal process. So it has to be determined first, and it may take some months to deal with, depending on how the court decides to deal with it. We can speculate as to why the province chose this path rather than expedite the process, but it is what it is. So their claim is that it's taken too much time has passed since the announcement, and that they've invested too much money to date to stop now. So undue delay and undue hardship. We're going to make the case that they actually set the pace for this process. If it took time, it was largely because of the process they used, or stretch of time in between when nothing much was happening. And even to date, we don't have the kind of information that residents need in order to be able to make an informed decision, at least that's my view. And the figures that they're quoting are questionable, so we have something to say about the numbers that they've come up with. So we'll be preparing an affidavit in response to their motion to dismiss. Now this can go one of three ways. They could succeed, in which case the judicial review stops. We could succeed, in which case it just carries on as it was meant to. The more likely case, according to our lawyer, is that given when you show up with two sort of sides and different kind of statements and so on, there's a good likelihood that the presiding judge will simply send it off to the tribunal and let them make their case there. But that would be within the larger application, which deals with the legality of their decision. And so it's a little less interesting for them, and they may just decide not to make that case when they get there. All right. Now, I have to say that in responding to the province's claim of undue delay, we'll probably have to refer to some of our efforts at the municipal level, and primarily in terms of municipal council stance, actions, or inactions, or whatever. Now, the real focus is still on the province. This is only about the province and their decision. But because they chose to challenge us on the timing of the application, in other words, the amount of time it took, we'll be explaining that it was reasonable under the circumstances for that time to take place. And that means talking about everything that happened in the last 2 years, instead of just focusing on the decision itself. But once that's solved, we get back to the main thing. Now, if you permit me an editorial note, here it comes. You must have expected something. Here it is. Council has often said that there's nothing it could do. But there's a difference between saying there's nothing you can do and wish that you could. That if an opportunity presents itself, you would do something to stop the prison. Versus saying that there's nothing that you can or are willing to do for any number of reasons, political or otherwise. So, if in the past 2 years, council as a whole, I assume, had wished that there was something that you could do about this, you know how to reach me. I'll be happy to talk to you about the kind of things that you could do now, where we are with the judicial review. All right, on to freedom of information requests. So there's been 14 so far from various residents. The only one that has produced any significant information has been the one that was launched immediately after the November 26, 2020 session, and that was by Lisa Gallant. Even though she's had to go through several appeals and so on, there has been some information, but all the other applications have largely been either not responded to or simply saying they have no records. We have some great stories to tell you how the runaround looks like. They're sent to different departments, all that stuff. But in the end, they're either in appeals or they're headed for adjudication, or some of them have expired. Now, an interesting tidbit. In their motion to dismiss, the province listed 16 due diligence activities that they've carried out and paid for. All right. But they've released none of that information, even through freedom of information, and their promises of transparency notwithstanding. Now, this is the kind of information that they should be sharing with the municipality. If they've done this work, you should have it. So if you do, I ask that you please share it with North Grenville residents. If you don't, then, in my view, you should be fed up with that kind of treatment. I know I would be, but so they claim they've done all this work, paid for it, but it's not out there for anybody to look at. Just now to move on to, because it's kind of related, the FOIs. One of them is around services, wastewater treatment, and so on. So in its letter of April 1st, 2022 to Gary, they say that yes, they still committed to cover their proportional share of the municipal sewage and wastewater treatment capacity and so on. But I do want to note a statement in that letter. Everyone might read it differently, but I want to still quote it. Quote, "The ministry's funding will be commensurate with the cost to accommodate the additional estimates for sewage and wastewater volume generated by the complex." So we're dealing with estimates, undetermined amounts, potentially in the future, and those versed in government speak might caution you to be careful about what this means, especially coming from deputy minister, not a minister, which is usually a method for ministers to give themselves a certain amount of wiggle room. Now, I've seen statements to the effect that this means the province will pony up around $13 million for the extra capacity. That's not what it says in the letter. So again, if there's a letter that specifies the actual amount or formula or methods that would be used, I would encourage you to share that with North Grenville residents as well. Now, I think we understand that about 33% of the latest planned expansion is to accommodate the proposed complex. Projected costs, as I understood, were around $40 million. 13 of that, the 33% I think is in there. However, inflation typically has an impact on capital projects. I'm sure you're aware of that. And also large infrastructure projects routinely go over budget. So even without inflation, you may be facing increased costs as you get into that business. And so it's reasonable to assume that it would be more. So the final part then is a proposal or a recommendation to you for a moratorium. Unless there's a letter that I have not seen, saying that they've put it in writing is not quite accurate. It's a commitment letter, but not firm numbers. There's no funding formula to take into account things like inflation. There's no specific details. So it's not really a firm contract. If anybody says they will contribute to new water pipes and that sort of thing, again, there's nothing that I'm aware of that's been confirmed in writing. So without specific and clear funding commitment, I think we should not be saying that they will be covering $13 million worth of the cost of the expanded project. Who knows what inflation will create. And in any event, this is not a gift to the municipality. It's their fair share, and how could they justify paying any less than their proportionate share? But when you read the letter, who knows what formula they're going to use. By way of example, if they were to use a percentage of the number of people in the prison and the number of the people being serviced by the treatment plant, if the treatment plant is serving, I don't know, say, is it 5,000 people? And the prison is going to generate 235 beds, 300 staff, say 500, that's 10%, not 33%. Even if you want to double that, that's only 20%, not 33%. So you need to be absolutely clear about how they're planning on calculating the estimates and their share. It may not be the share of the total cost, it may be the share of what they think they're contributing to the whole thing. It's a cautionary tale. So we're not questioning the need for the expansion, obviously, based on the predicted growth in Kemptville. That's obvious. But given the judicial review process, which could stop there could be a prohibition order that stops the whole prison, the inability to get any information, at least from our end, through the FOIs, I think it would be prudent for council to not sign up for something that may not happen. I think it would be financially prudent for council to put a moratorium on the construction part and the spending part for this extra capacity, given that the prison project may not go forward for some time. They've already pushed the time out. I think I mentioned that. They pushed it out by an extra 18 months already from their original estimates of when they would start the work. They haven't issued the requests for qualification as they were going to do this year yet, and so on. So given all of that, and it, like I say, might not happen at all if the judicial review process succeeds, that's my recommendation to council, is to consider a moratorium on signing us up for something that may not turn out to be what they said it would be,